So here's a computer-generated image of memory now at the Guggenheim anymore. We had the additional challenge of taking the sculpture and finding a similar space with similar kind of architectural principles and characteristics in New York. The conservation team just working the night before the finishing touches of the work. And that's Anish. And it's the same sculpture, right? It's the same object, but here you have a completely different kind of view or fragmentation or part of the work within the context of New York itself. And what was wonderful here was that you saw this sculpture in relationship to the permanent collection. So as you walked past Manet and Klee, Kandinsky and Picasso, suddenly you had a glimpse of this huge industrial sculpture sitting very gently like a balloon in the galleries. So like I said, we always try to find ways of working with artists over time. And subsequent to memory, the Guggenheim Museum asked Anish to present this work to them for consideration to their public collection. So each of the Guggenheim spaces has its own collection, and exhibitions are shared, and collections are looked across the various spaces. So this is a view of the Frank Gehry space from the river in Gaitonde. We also tend to do very historic exhibitions, very academic exhibitions. This was an exhibition that was surveying 130 years of American art and how lots of Asian ideas, philosophies and literatures have really informed the development of American art through the 20th century. A very kind of thesis-based exhibition trying to educate American audiences about the fact that art history is world art history, and it doesn't just belong to the genealogies and traditions of Western Europe and America, but also to other forms of knowledge and creative production. So this was organized in 7 sections, and starting with very historical materials from the late 19th century and the early influence of Japan and the culture of the Orient in the kind of mindset of American artists working in the 1860s and 1870s. And the influence also in photography, sculpture. Here's a view of the ramps, as well as the performing arts, literature. If you think of Ezra Pound, if you think of Jack Kerouac, if you think of the Beat Generation, there are many kind of subtexts that were playing out in this exhibition. A whole section dedicated to fluxus, as well as mid-20th century Avex and calligraphic art, to somebody like Robert Rauschenberg, who was in Japan in the mid-1960s. Also very important phases of minimalism and post-minimalism. To, of course, the onset of conceptual art, body performance, and it's very important. Taiwanese artist called Cai Guo Qiang, who immigrated to America in the 1980s and has done a series of very important performance-based practices. Sometimes we also work with younger artists, with more emerging artists or artists who are working with very experimental media. And I devised this exhibition that was Being Singular Plural, that was inspired by a book by Jean-Luc Nancy, who's a contemporary French philosopher who works with political theories and cinema, and engaged 7 contemporary filmmakers who live and work across India to get into a kind of very long R&D based exhibition with me, where we commissioned and produced a lot of these works for our Berlin space, and then over a period of 2 years or 3 years, a lot of these works about primarily film, video, and sound got a second life at the Solomon in New York. And subsequent to that, over the last year or two, many of spaces. So, these are real commitments to artists over 4 or 5 year periods, and it enables us to get involved in their the very nascent stages of their creativity, in the editing studios, in their artist studios, actually helping them figure out the work itself, how to raise the money for it, how to make it done, how to produce it, where to edit it, how to show it, what format to show it in, the final installation plans, and then of course bringing it out into the public eye. So it was a very, very kind of collaborative, creative process, and I enjoyed it thoroughly, and many of these filmmakers have become dear friends, and we are still continuing to collaborate with one another and work on projects, both for the Guggenheim as well as for other spaces. A young set of filmmakers who work in Assam, which is a part of India that's very little known. So it's also trying to give a voice to practitioners and intellectuals and writers and cultural producers who wouldn't really have a chance to have their work exhibited and shared in such a mainstream and prestigious platform like Guggenheim. And also trying to then engage with public art and subform. So one of the sound installations in this exhibition was actually installed on the periphery of the Guggenheim Museum along Fifth Avenue. So we had people jogging in Central Park, coming by into the museum at 1 o'clock in the morning just to get a sense of what this installation was all about. So it's important for us to try to do things that are unusual, do things that challenge both the building and the audience, and of course the artist himself or herself. A very important filmmaker in India called Anish Kapoor, who is an activist filmmaker. This is a work of art called The Tone First Pages, looking at the struggle of democracy in Burma over the last 50 years. And we showed it in Berlin, and we also showed it in New York. And then subsequently it's a work that's coming to the collection of the museum. So we know that this work will always be studied and archived and cared for within the protection and the care of the Guggenheim. We've also done retrospectives of very senior artists like Lee Ufan, who have been very real stalwarts and real mavericks and real teachers and mentors to younger artists and artists who've been very, very celebrated in Asia but haven't received adequate exposure of an equivalent kind in the West. So this was a major retrospective. He's an artist who is of Korean origin but has been based in Japan for many, many years and works both with sculpture as well as with painting, and was let's say the brain behind a very important movement called MoMA, or the School of Things, which was a very important school of art, primarily in the 60s and the 70s. And so, early works like this from the late 1960s. And a lot of these works, which were created at the time, were destroyed because they were considered ephemeral, performative artworks. And it's challenging for a museum that's dedicated to history to try to revive these works of art that only exist as historical documentation. So many times we will show original photographs, and other times, if the artist is still alive, we will get his permission to actually refabricate the work, providing both the original date of conception of the work, which is 1969, as well as the date of refabrication, which is 2011. As was the case with a lot of these works that no longer exist, but that have been destroyed. Another very senior artist from Asia called Zarina, who was born in Aligarh, in India in 1937. She's exactly the same age as me, but has been living and working in New York since 1975. And this was a retrospective, This was a retrospective that was a collaboration with the Guggenheim Museum in Los Angeles as well as the Art Institute of Chicago. And Zarina is primarily a printmaker who also works with sculpture and taught at the printmaking department of the university for many years. And again, has been in New York for the last 35 years and had never received her due. So it was wonderful to be able to do this retrospective for her and travel across these 3 cities. And the press in New York just went ballistic. We had people from the New York Times, from the Guggenheim Mail, as well as the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, really celebrating her work as a great modernist as well as a great contemporary artist who they felt like they were discovering for the first time, but in fact she's had a very solid practice for the last 40 years. And so, you know, it was lovely to get different kinds of audiences to reckon with her work, to study with it and to appreciate it. Also, we will sometimes, like I mentioned, in relationship to Lee Ufan, we will sometimes also focus on very particular art movements. So Butai, some of you will know, very important post-war Japanese collector that was very, very active in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s. And this was the first time that major museum exhibition was happening anywhere in the world on Butai specifically. And you know, some of these artists are still alive in the 80s and early 90s, so we had them and all their assistants come to New York. And in other instances, only their archives and their estates exist. So again, we were having to go in and document and research all their archives to understand how we could refabricate the work and present it to the public. You know, Butai is a movement that really celebrates the performative aspect of painting and the relationship of the body and painting, of body and space and painting. And you know, this was happening in Japan before, or concurrently, or just prior to the rise of abstract expressionism in the West and performance art in the West. And if you look at many of the dates of these works, they in fact happened before these major currents of American art history that we know very, very well, because that's what we study. But in fact, in many ways, Butai and the artists associated with Butai were prefiguring many of these mainstream artistic movements. So again, a very big eye-opener for critics and art historians and audiences in New York to look at this really major non-Western art movement that is looking at very similar concerns, and in many cases 3 or 4 or 5 years prior to what we knew in the West.